Alright, I'm working on a little JAMMA test rig. Right now I've got power into a line filter, to a distribution block. I got a power switch, supposed to be a lit power switch. Looks like the light has burned out already from Radio Shack. It doesn't say how much power the switch is supposed to take. It was working, and now it's not, so I didn't know if it was 12 volt or AC or what, but there it is, power on, and it's not lighting up. Anyway, switch goes to this power supply. Switcher is going into the game, and what I've been working on is trying to get these Sidewinder controllers to work. I've got a speaker hooked up for sound. Right now the Amiga monitor I got doesn't work. Looks like the flyback's gone, so I don't have a video hooked up. But I hooked coin up to this button here. Start is start, and then buttons 1, 2, and 3 are ABC. The directionals were toning out with a multimeter. The rest of the buttons were not. So I'm going to go ahead, and I've already tested this, but I just want to make a little video. Here, I'll press this, and you should be able to hear coin up on the speaker there. There we go. Hit start, which started. Now it's doing a text scroll telling you about your mission. A to bypass, and I press A, and you can hear the game firing. B, not sure what that button does in this game. This game is Konami Devastators. It's just like a test board I use. So add some more credits. Firing. I can't tell if up, down, left, right works without video, obviously, but the coin and the start and the fire work, and those were the ones that weren't working at all before. So it looks like they are working now. That's good news. So, without going into too much detail, this is the inside of a Sidewinder gameport PC controller. This one I got has got some wire harness damage up here, so I'm just using it for scrap testing. Gameport, PC gameport joysticks, for those of you who don't remember because you're too young, used to plug into your sound card with a 15-pin plug. So when people make test rigs and use controllers, they usually use Neo Geo controllers, which also have a 15-pin plug, common ground, and they're straight plug into your JAMMA harness. If you put a 15-pin connector on the end of your JAMMA harness, like this, unfortunately I didn't realize that the Neo Geos are female and the Sidewinders are male. That was my first issue. Not a big deal, but if anybody's planning to do this mod, it's one thing to take into consideration. The other thing is that these pads didn't work right out of the box like a Neo Geo pad will. So why use these instead of Neo Geo? Well, Neo Geo pads run about 50 bucks each on eBay, which is kind of expensive for a test rig, whereas these controllers you can get, you know, I think I paid 16 for two, even though one of them turned out to have a ripped wiring harness. I also got a new one box for 16, so even with 3 controllers now, I've still paid less than if I had gotten one Neo Geo controller. So if you don't mind doing the work, it can save you some money. So basically the Sidewinders have 15-pin connector. There's all the wires come out to these 2 connectors. And if you go online, you can look up controller hacking. But the one issue I was having are these carbon pads. So when you push the button down, a rubberized carbon pad connects between the fingers on these pads and connects it to ground, thus setting the button off. Well, my directionals seemed to be working when I was testing it, but the other buttons weren't. So one of the things I did with this junk controller is I took fiberglass pencil to these carbon connectors, and I found that there's copper underneath the directionals. But when I took it to these buttons, there's nothing underneath. They just printed the carbon material right on the PCB, and the only copper is where the wire trace touches the carbon, and then the copper stops, and then it's all this carbon material. So I was getting somewhere in the range of about 130 ohms resistance. So it wasn't enough to set the multimeter continuity beep off, which drove me crazy until I finally switched over to resistance and found that there was resistance. It was just too high to set off the continuity of the multimeter beep. So I looked at some various ways to fix this, and what I ended up doing is buying some Snug and Snail copper adhesive tape from the hardware store. It's like a 15-foot roll, about, I don't know what that is, like 1.25 inches thick, for like $8, so a huge amount of this copper tape. And what I did was first, the pad that I had scraped down to the bare PCB, I put some of this copper tape on. It solders really easily, soldered it to the connectors for ground and the button input. And I was getting somewhere around 30 ohms of resistance, which was enough to set the continuity beep off on my meter. The next one I did, I left the carbon traces on, put the copper tape, soldered it, just kind of used my fingernail to stick the adhesive down to the carbon pads, did it, and got the same readings. So the controller that I'm testing here, I actually went in A, B, C, M, and start on this controller and did the same thing. Cut 2 pieces of carbon for each button. I'm not sure how good this camera is focusing, but cut 2 pieces of copper, put them down with a little gap in the middle, soldered them to the traces for the ground plane and for the button input, which goes down to here. Again, look up hacking Sidewinder controllers. There's all kinds of good pictures on showing you right here. All the buttons have nice labeled holes here. The directionals are labeled over here. So I ran these wires. I ran extension wires over here for ABC, start, and coin. And then underneath this mess is up, down, left, right. And so I soldered those wires there. So I've got the pins coming out in a Neo Geo arrangement to the 15-pin connector that match up with these. So when you push these buttons, instead of sending the data to the onboard chip in the Sidewinder, you're sending it straight out through the wires to the JAMMA harness. So all the electronics in here is bypassed. And it was a pain in the neck to figure all this out, but once I did it, it seems to be working. Again, it's a lot of work. It's kind of a kludgy fix, but it seems to be working. And like I said, I've got I've got about as much into this project as if you just bought one Neo Geo controller pad. And I ended up with, like I said, 3 pads, 1 new in box. This guy up here is new in box, never used. This one was one of the used ones I got, which is in really nice shape. And then the one over there that turned out to be pretty crappy shape that I'm just using to test things on. So yes, to show anybody, if you're thinking of doing the test rig, you want controllers, you don't want to spend the money on Neo Geo controllers, you can also use some of the Sega controllers. I think they might even be easier, although I think they only allow 2 or 3 buttons. This one, if I wanted to, right now, like I said, I've got JAMMA button 1, 2, and 3, coin in, and start. There are solder pads for the rest of these buttons, as well as the shoulder buttons, so you can get a whole ton of buttons on this thing if you really wanted to wire them up. And yeah, just wired them up to match the Neo Geo controller pinout I found out online. And just bought a 15-pin D-sub connector, soldered my JAMMA harness wires to it. So I've got 1 for player 1 for player 2. Go to my Bob Roberts JAMMA harness here. Currently, as I said, the JAMMA harness, I've got speaker output just going to this spare arcade speaker I had for testing. I don't have video hooked up. Terminates in a 6-pin plug here. Like I said, I had an Amiga monitor that the flyback appears to be dead on. I wired up a 6-pin DIN. It's one of the ones that uses a 6-pin DIN for input. Look up Amiga monitors. There's different types of inputs and outputs. But yeah, there's no high voltage on my Amiga monitor, so that's another project for another day. And yeah, the theory was to put everything in this box, poking holes in the side, a little hole for little PC fans to get some airflow, switch inputs, cut some notches in this box for the video and audio out. And then this piece of wood that's laying flat right now is going to stick up here. So I basically got almost half of this box empty. And it's plenty enough room to fit 2 controllers and the JAMMA harness. So, turn this off. The theory is, you have the lid down, you have a couple holes here to plug your controllers in. You can put a JAMMA board on the top here. It's wood. I'll probably stain it at some point, but it's non-conductive. It's plenty large enough to hold most boards, and if they do hang over, you know, they're not going to bend or warp or anything because so much of it will be supported. It'll close, and yeah, it'll be a self-contained JAMMA test rig that you can just put on a shelf when you're not using, or pull it down, bring it with you when you go somewhere. There's also room for a transformer in here, so I might put one in there. I'm thinking right now I've got the switching power controlled by this switch. I'm thinking I'll add another switch, so I'll have one switch that's marked with a T that only turns on the transformer, one marked with an S that turns on only the switcher. That way, if you're using an arcade monitor, you can flip both switches and hook this up in an arcade cabinet as a complete solution to power the monitor and a game board inside a JAMMA arcade cabinet. If you're just testing on an Amiga monitor or some other video output, you can leave the transformer switched off. If you're just testing a monitor, you can just turn the transformer on, feed it input from some other source, but power it from this box. So yeah, that will be a pretty cool portable test rig. It's a bit larger than I thought, but this box was like $20 at Hobby Lobby. So it's, you know, it's like, well, let's go ahead and do that. It's not that expensive, even though it's a bit large. It'll fit on the shelf in here on my project bench. And yeah, that's pretty much it for now. What I've got seems to be working. Like I said, with this copper tape, I appear to have somewhere around, it was between 20 and 30 ohms of resistance on the buttons. And at least for this JAMMA game, that seems to be working. I don't know if that's too high of a resistance to use with some classic boards or other JAMMA boards. I've got a couple other boards I can try here to see if it works for all JAMMA boards, or at least the ones I have. I'm not sure what the actual limit is when it comes to resistance for switches for arcade games. I was looking up online and I couldn't really find too much. I found some posts by Ken Layton that indicated if your coin input switches have more than 5 ohms of resistance, it means they might be tarnished internally. So I'm wondering if some of the early, I think he was talking about a Midway game, maybe it was a Pac-Man or something. So maybe the Midway coin inputs are expecting a lower resistance in order to work, so it might be a problem with that. But as of now, for this JAMMA game, Konami Devastators anyway, it appears to be working. So I've got this one controller finished. So I will wait until I get a monitor so I can make sure and test it a little bit better, and test all the other buttons and make sure it's working on a couple different boards before I tear the new in box one apart and do the same thing. But it's looking pretty promising for now.